What's up guys, Andrew Baena here, and today I'm going to be doing my top 10 favorite albums of 2018. Before we go any farther into this, do not ask me what about X band or you forgot about blah blah blah. The reason it's not here is because I either didn't like it or I didn't listen to it. So these are my personal favorites. You guys can like whatever you want, I'll like whatever I like, and we'll move on from there. My second disclaimer is that there are a couple of releases on this list that are not released in 2018. They were released in 2017, but I just heard of them this year, so I still included them in this list anyways, because these are the top 10 albums that I listened to the most this year, regardless of when they came out necessarily. So with that being said, I'm going to go from number 10 to number 1 in order, and we're going to start out with a very underground band called Partay. Apparently that's how you pronounce their name. I had no idea the first time I talked about them. They're a band from Australia, and they remind me a lot of the band called Villains, aka Youth Forever, or Skeleton Youth Forever, whatever those guys were called at the end of their career. But yeah, I was a huge fan of Villains. I'm just going to call them Villains. We toured with them briefly in 2014, and I always really liked them. Their album Freudian Slip is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I hadn't really heard another band that sounded quite like them until I found out about these guys. So if you're a fan of kind of that Villains, kind of heavy hardcore vibe, I think this will scratch that itch. Once again, these guys are called Partay, and they sound something like this. The next album I want to talk about is Helix by Crystal Lake. The only reason this is so low on my list is because I just listened to the album in full for the first time today. It's actually not even out in North America yet, it's only out in Japan. But I found it and I listened to it, no shame. It's amazing, and even if I hadn't heard the whole album, honestly, the two singles, Apollo and Aeon, are good enough that it deserves a spot on this list just for those two songs alone. There are a lot of other really good songs on the album though, so you should definitely check it out. Once again, this is Crystal Lake, and this is what they sound like. The next band on my list has unfortunately broken up this year. They are called Shields UK. I had heard of them a few times over the years, but never really got into them for one reason or the other. I finally checked them out this year for their last album ever. This album is called Life in Exile. There's a lot of really good tracks on this, but honestly I think my favorite is still Black Dog, which was the first song I heard by them and the reason why I decided to check out the rest of their music. So this is what Shields UK sounds like, and this song is called Black Dog. The next album on my list is Holy Hell by Architects. I know some of you are going to be very upset that it's so low on my list, but honestly, this album didn't quite meet my expectations. I was expecting something a little more than what I got, which I know might be kind of a controversial thing to say due to the nature of the album, but that very same nature of the album being that they released it after the passing away of Tom Searle is why it still deserves a place on my list in my opinion. Even though I was a little underwhelmed by it, it still is a really good album, and it's also the band's first time writing and releasing anything that doesn't have Tom in it. So to even move forward through some catastrophic event in your life like that, as well as losing someone who wrote basically everything from my understanding, is incredibly hard to do. I can't even imagine. I hope I never personally have to go through that. So with that being said, it still definitely deserves a spot in my top 10, and there are still quite a few amazing songs on this record, even though I was a little bit let down by a couple of them. The next album on my list is Pain Again by a band called Varials. This is one of those albums that did come out in 2017, so it's not technically a 2018 release, but I only started listening to them recently, this year rather. So for me, they're still on this list because I jammed this album a lot this year. There's lots of really good songs on this album. And also, like, you just have to listen to the bass tone. The bass tone that they have is the most brutal thing I've ever heard. And they also manage to sound incredibly heavy without using like studio effects. Like, I don't think they have any bass drops on the whole album, or at least none that I noticed. And they're still ridiculously heavy. So this band is called Burials. Here's how they sound. The next album I'm going to talk about isn't technically an album, it's actually a split EP from two bands. One is Loathe and the second is Holding Absence. The only real reason that this is on my list is because of Loathe. Holding Absence's songs are good, but not really my thing. Honestly, White Hot is just such an amazing song that basically just because of that song, it's so high on my list because I don't know, that might honestly still be my favorite song of the entire year. It's just so good. I can't wait for Loathe to release new music. They've been absolutely killing it this year since I discovered them. They just did like a huge sold out tour, or sorry, not tour, show with Architects like last night, I'm pretty sure. So it looks like they're onwards and upwards to doing bigger and better things, and I absolutely can't wait to hear what their new music sounds like. The next album on my list is called Nadir by Black Tongue. This is pretty much the heaviest thing I've ever heard. I'm pretty sure every single time Black Tongue releases something, I'm convinced that there's no possible way they can get heavier, and they always do. They never disappoint, and this is no exception. Nadir is absolutely mind-bendingly heavy in my opinion. From the very first track all the way to the end, it just consistently gets heavier and heavier. It just has this overwhelming, like, depressing vibe to it, which is just perfect for what I want Black Tongue to sound like. My favorite track off of this album is called Second Death, and it sounds like this. The next release will be another controversial one, perhaps. It is Chelsea Grin's newest album, which is titled Eternal Nightmare. Now, I know a lot of people do not like Chelsea Grin anymore because they've had so many changes over the years. There's not even any original members who were in the band when they released their classic songs like Recreant. But I am one of those people that only got into them when they released the Evolve EP, and that's kind of when they started to change sounds. So they released the Evolve EP back in like 2012 or something like that, and I thought it was amazing. And then I kind of lost track of them again because I found them to get a little bit boring. And then they released this new stuff with Dead Rose especially that really caught my attention and really like reignited what I liked so much about this band back in the Evolve days. My favorite song on the album honestly is still Hostage, which was like the second single that they released. That song is just so simple but so heavy. I just love that song, and the rest of the album is pretty damn good too. That's why it's so high on my list. So this is Chelsea Grin, Eternal Nightmare, and this song is called Hostage. The next release is another 2017 release. This is an album called Mono by a band called Alpha Wolf, another Australian band. They've actually had a vocalist change since this album came out, and their two new singles are also extremely good. But for this video, since we're talking about albums, I decided to put their last album on here. Again, I just discovered them this year, and I listened to Mono so much this summer especially. Once again, the main reason I like them so much is because they remind me of bands that I used to listen to a lot. If you ever listen to a band called Sworn In, they released an album called The Death Card back in like 2012 maybe, 2013, something like that. And that album, in my opinion, was like genre defining. I still listen to the Death Guard, at least one song from the Death Guard, like every single week. And Mono by Alpha Wolf kind of like, in my opinion, took the vibe that was presented with Sworn In's album and just ran with it, and I am a huge fan of that. I loved the Death Guard. Mono by Alpha Wolf sounds very similar to the Death Guard. That's not a diss towards the band at all. I love it. And I can't wait to hear more music from them. They just released a single today and it's amazing as well. So if you like this clip, definitely go check out their new stuff as well.
I've got this hole in my chest. It's missing you, I swear. I've got this hole in my chest. It's missing you, I swear.
And number one on my list is When the End Began by Silent Planet. I've actually listened to these guys for quite a number of years since their first release. The first song I heard was Native Blood, and that was, I think, back in like 2014 or something like that. And I've always really liked these guys, but it was always kind of like a song here or there that I really liked. It was never like a whole album kind of band to me. It was a band where I always liked their singles, but never really their full-length albums. And I feel like with When the End Began, they finally fully encompassed and fully realized the sound that they're going for, and it's just the perfect Silent Planet release in my opinion. I really like all the songs in this album, and it's an amazing album front to back. I am not usually one to care for lyrics too much, but the way that this band presents lyrics is so fascinating to me. It's just so well researched, so well thought out, and they even present all their lyrics with actual annotations and footnotes, which I've never seen any other band do, so I just found that very fascinating. And also their guitarists are just incredible. Everything about this album and this band just really blew me away with this release, and that is why I think they're deserving of the number one spot. So that's all for this video. I'm sure you guys will disagree with some of my picks, and that's okay. That's why you have your favorite releases and I have mine. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you're new to this channel, or if you haven't hit it yet. I'm on my way to hitting 100,000 subscribers very soon. Other than that, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.